gentlemen, thank you again for joining us. My name is Anthony. This is Hawai'i Commercial Kitchens, another episode of our Technical Assistance Workshop series, this one on capitalization, featuring our friend Dr. Brett Carey with Edward Jones, as well as a few other special guests. Before we get started, I'm just going to quickly introduce the program for those of you that are not aware of it. You can check everything out online at www.hawaiicommercialkitchens.com. This website is a resource for commercial kitchens and food businesses on Hawaii Island. If you have been in business since March of 2020 and are in the food business, you are an eligible participant. You can register right here. And we offer free technical assistance and business support services, which includes business consulting, marketing, financial planning, permitting and compliance, food safety, HACCP plans, and personnel management. If you need a commercial kitchen, check out the Hawaii Island Kitchen Directory for available commercial kitchens for rent in your area. And if you are watching this workshop, that means you probably registered. Here on this page, we have the rest of the workshops scheduled through the end of the year. And if you missed a workshop, you can watch the edited recording right here at the bottom. So that's a little overview of Hawai'i Commercial Kitchens. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Brett to talk a little bit about capitalization and also introduce another one of our guests. Thanks, Brett.
Okay. Well, thanks, Anthony, and thanks, everyone, for being here. So, yeah, my name is Brett. I'm a financial advisor with Edward Jones, but prior to that, I operated a number of small businesses as well. And so I'll introduce myself a little bit more formally later, but wanted to introduce Brandon from First Hawaiian Bank. He's a loan officer and VP over there. So yeah, Brandon, can you say a couple words about yourself and kind of let everyone know what you do?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Brandon Mailhot. I'm the Vice President of Business Banking for First Hawaiian Bank. So I deal with a lot of the smaller businesses all the way up to the large. I've been in the banking industry since 2005, so 20 years now. So I have a vast background in different avenues from consumer to business. And so I'm just here to give some insight and answer any questions that you guys may have.
Today we're going to be talking about ways to raise money for either your startup or existing business, right? So we're going to be talking about these 10 basic ideas here if you take a look at the screen. And we're going to be breaking those down into 5 categories overall. And so Brandon is here to talk more about the loans aspect. And I'm going to talk to you all a little bit more about angel investors, venture capital, startup incubators, crowdsourcing, and things like that. But yeah, Brandon, if you can take us through what you do as far as helping businesses and kind of talk about your process with First Hawaiian Bank and yeah, what makes someone a good candidate for a loan?
Yeah, for sure. So in the banking industry, I do loans from 10,000 all the way up into whatever number you can think of. And so it's a matter of qualification. And so what qualifies a business to get a loan? Generally, we're going to look at a business that's already been operating. We would look at your business financials, such as your tax return, profit and loss, balance sheet, and we would calculate your cash flow and find out kind of what type of loan you're looking for or line. And then we create what we call as a debt service spread. And so the debt service spread generally looks at, if you're familiar with financials, you would look at your EBITDA, and then you would take your yearly interest or your yearly payments, and we would divide it. And you want to have a debt service of 1.3 or higher. So that means that you have liquidity and you have cash flow, and you're not just skirting by on the coattails. That's where we start. And then once you have that, then we can kind of work backwards into what you qualify for. So if you're applying for something of 200 and we run the debt service and you're kind of, at a 1.2, then we would say, well, how do we change that number? We would lower your loan amount, which would then kind of divide it in. And then once we get to that magic number, that's kind of more of a benchmark. There are exceptions beyond that rule, but that's kind of the macro. And we also have a loan program that if you're asking for something smaller, such as $10,000 all the way up to $50,000, and if you've been in business for at least 3 years, we're just going to use the person applying, the guarantor. We're going to base it off their credit score. So we would do it where we wouldn't ask for any type of financials. And those loans or lines, generally we can process in a few days where you can have access to them. So if you're looking for something fairly quick, where you're not going to documentation and underwriting, we would do something such as like a $50,000 line, and I do those very frequently, and we're able to get those to those customers within the week, so they can access it if it's for working capital, if it's for equipment, such as the kitchen industry. Like if you're looking for, I've done stuff where they're replacing ovens or hoods or upgrading equipment to something newer, and they want something like a smaller loan where they don't want to use their cash to be more liquid, then they can definitely do that. So those are kind of the larger bullet points that we can talk on. And if there's any questions, you guys are more than willing to ask. We'll provide my contact information, so if you guys want to reach out to me at any point, please feel free to reach out, ask questions, and I'll be glad to answer them for you.
To, I guess, start transitioning, I would say Tony from Mayan World Farm asked if there are any interest-free loans, and traditionally there are not, but untraditionally there are. So I'm going to see if our friend Mary is with us. Mary, are you able to join us?
I'll just introduce myself.
Yeah, welcome, Mary Spadaro from Slow Money Hawaiʻi. Mary, tell us a little bit about what you do.
Thank you. So back, I don't know how many years ago now, 11 years ago maybe, they had Hawaii's first food summit on Oahu out at the North Shore, the Hawaii Food Summit. I think it was 3 days. And shortly after that, I heard about Slow Money. And the next 2 summits that I went to in the 2 following years, I kept asking around, is anybody here interested in starting Slow Money? We need one in Hawaii. And there were a couple people who were interested, but nothing was happening. So I finally decided if I want this to happen, I need to do it myself. So I founded and have been facilitating Slow Money ever since, starting in about 2017. And there is or was a national presence. Many of the chapters have stopped operating, and some of them have gotten really big, and some of them have changed their names. And Slow Money, it's the original name and founder, Woody Tash, has changed their model over to a fund, a revolving fund that makes loans to farmers with donated money. And I think there's 0 interest. So, but Hawaii, as far as I know, Hawaii people probably wouldn't be able to apply for that. I think it's a local thing. So anyhow, the model that I started here is based on the fact that I come out of a fundraising career. And so I'm more familiar with fundraising from individuals. And what I do is I reach out to members of our community and ask them if they'd like to participate in helping local farmers with their capital needs with a small loan at low interest, to bolster Hawaii's food supply and our ability to feed ourselves.
So I first was introduced to Mary and Slow Money Hawaiʻi back when I was doing Big Island Box out of the Hilo Food Hub. Hilo Food Hub utilized Slow Money for a bridge loan, and then I utilized Slow Money with Big Island Box through a Kiva loan, and now here we are 5 years later.
Yeah, so thanks, Anthony. I love it when there's a live testimonial in the audience. So, and I think hopefully you'll recognize some of the other farmers that I have on this slideshow. As Slow Money has evolved over time, over many years, lots of phone calls and pounding the pavement, we've had a total of 71 people make loans to our local farmers. And a few of those are on the mainland, either because they were a close friend or relative of the borrower and they decided to participate, or because they maintain a part-time residency in Hawaii and they wanted to participate. There's only a couple of those. So for the majority, most of the lenders live on Oahu and the Big Island, and it's getting to the point now where we can almost fund a Big Island loan with only Big Island lenders, or a Oahu loan with only Oahu lenders. And we're actually open to all islands, but we've only had a couple of borrowers on Maui and a couple of borrowers on Kauai. So I also have utilized Slow Money as a trustee on the Kiva lending platform. And I think this is what Anthony was referring to when he says alternative loans and no interest. So Kiva, if you're familiar with it, is an online platform. And I think their maximum loan amount now is $10,000. And I don't believe there's a minimum. If there is, it's pretty low. And there's zero interest. Anybody can go on and apply, but it's to your benefit if you have a trustee such as Slow Money Hawaiʻi. A trustee will give you more credibility and make an endorsing statement about you on the platform. And in the case of Slow Money Hawaiʻi, we also have our own lending team on Kiva, and we invite borrowers to become part of the team as well as lenders. And the majority of lenders on our team are local. So we have 119 members, and they have funded $240,000 in loans to Hawaii farmers.
And Mary, what are the like loan amount ranges for something like this?
Well, Kiva, like I said, I believe it's a maximum of $10,000, and I don't think there's a minimum. And
So there
there
you go.
is
Maximum of 10,000, no minimum. And for Brandon here at First Hawaiian Bank, their minimum is 10,000.
Oh, perfect fit. Okay. Of course, Slow Money's an even better fit, and I'll get on to telling you about that. So one of the very first, there's several very early loans that we made, and John Cadman on Maui, his Pono Pies, was one of them. It was $10,000. It was before he started distributing his products statewide, and he needed to get labels printed. And he didn't have the capital to print his labels in bulk, which brought the price down something like 75% on a per label price. So he got a Slow Money loan and he bought his labels, and then he started distributing statewide. And I'm sure you're all familiar with Pono Pies. He's quite the success story. And he also was instrumental in getting Ulu taken up by the Hawaii Ulu Cooperative and others. And then Lava Meats, she's out of Kea'au, I believe. She's a small charcuterie and farmer and has started farmers markets.
Shout out
She,
Leslie. Well,
yeah,
shout out
yes.
Leslie from Lava Meats here in person.
Anthony knows her because
She's here.
she was. Oh, hi, Leslie. And I can vouch for her products. They're wonderful. So Leslie's loan was to buy a bigger meat grinder, if I remember correctly. And then this is the Hilo Food Hub that Anthony mentioned. It was kind of like a kitchen incubator. And there were several businesses that went through here. I'm kind of disappointed that they didn't relocate this same operation, but he did get a lot of little businesses started, and his loan was to pay for upgrades to the warehouse that he was starting the food hub in, for electrical upgrades and a bunch of equipment for the commercial kitchen. And he's one of the examples where he actually had secured grant funds to do this project, but the grants were on a reimbursement basis. So he needed the capital upfront to do this. And don't you guys start thinking about stealing my borrowers who have grants. um, he needed the upfront capital. So the slow money lenders came together with a very short term loan. I think it was less than a year. It might have just been even less than 6 months, and loaned him that capital. He got everything installed. Then the inspector comes and signs off on all of it, and the grant money is released, and he pays back his slow money lenders. And then during COVID, we did a lot of matchmaking, matching farmers to some of the food hubs that, or just they weren't even called hubs yet until COVID was well underway. But for example, we connected Julius Ludovico and his chickens to the Kualoa ranch market. And we did others like that so that they could continue to move their product when the markets that they had been working with had to be shut down for COVID. And there we are, Julius Ludovico's chicken. One of his lenders will come up later that I'll tell you about how the lender and borrower became a mentor type of relationship. And he's pasture raised chicken on Oahu's North Shore at Wailua. This is another Wailua farmer, and this was another case where he actually got grants and they were on a reimbursement basis. And this was a much longer term loan, in excess of a year, because of the time that it took to get the order in, get the equipment landed, get the high tunnels built, and then reimburse the lenders. This is Jason Whitty and his wife Jennifer and their two little girls. And they started with Jennifer being a Go Farm cohort student. And then Jason started thinking, hey, that's what she's doing is pretty cool. And he got involved. And they were on an incubator property provided by Go Farm when they first borrowed $10,000 from Slow Money. And then about a year later, they had the opportunity to move to a couple acres of farmland on the North Shore. And they took out another loan to make improvements on that farm. And then a couple years after that, they got grant funding for a grant for a high tunnel, and they built the high tunnel, and that was another slow money loan. And then a year after that, they had the opportunity to buy land in Wailua, and they needed to make improvements on that land, and they were putting up a farm structure. They needed money for that. That was yet another slow money loan. And now they're on their last slow money loan, installing two more high tunnels, one on the old farm and one on the new farm. And it's just, they're such a perfect example of what slow money is about, going from being a Go Farm student on 1/8 acre of land and doing your farm box, the subscription model, to now being a landowner with 3 high tunnels, 2 farm locations, a house that they live in, and it just doesn't get any more meaningful than that. So we're really pleased with that. And they did a total of, I think they did one Kiva loan and probably 4 slow money loans. And for the slow money loans, it was almost all the same people coming back to relend for each one of those loans. So they really got to know each other and develop a relationship. And that's the other part I want to emphasize about what slow money is about. It's not the same as going to a bank or USDA and going through an institutional process and getting approved and getting the loan and having really clear terms that you need to stick to or you're going to get in trouble. And you should stick to. And instead, it's really about rallying community around our farmers, and money is part of the transaction. But we want these people to get to know each other. We want the farmer and the lenders to get to know each other. We want them to have an ongoing relationship. By the way, I saw one of our lenders on this call, Marty, if I can identify you, if you're still here.
Shout out Marty, Ocean Grace Farms.
And Marty has participated in several loans, as do many of our slow money lenders. So then we, more recently, some of you might know India Clark. She's been very active with ORCD and the Farmers Union. And she and her partner have an orchard on the North Shore. They recently did a loan for, I think it was $20,000 or $25,000 for materials for their orchard and a shelter for the orchard. And she's in the process of paying that back. We did a loan to Mermaid Mushrooms when she was building out her warehouse. Her loan was $40,000, and she ended up refinancing her loan for, I think, a USDA loan because she needed more. And then Paniolo Paws, we did a bridge loan for them. I think it was $25,000 so that they could, what was that for? I think it had something to do with their compostable. Oh, I remember. So we did a bridge loan for them until the rest of their slow money loan from individuals could be completed. And so once those loans came in, they paid off the bridge loan. That's not something we do regularly, but occasionally we will do that. We did something like that with Thrive Farm in Wailua, the one with the high tunnels as well. And so what their loan was for was to buy this rather expensive packaging for their dog treats, which is fully compostable. And that's the other thing that slow money is about. We're not crazy about financing traditional agriculture, traditional as in pesticides, etc. We understand that some of that is necessary, but we like to work with farmers who are trying to do things pono as possible. And then on the North Shore of Oahu, we were doing 2 loans simultaneously, and we brought everybody together to see the end results, which was the high tunnels on Thrive Farm and also a big tractor for Counterculture Farm, which is now called the Banana Source. So I mentioned earlier about Ludovico Chicken having a lender who became a mentor. So some of you may have heard of Twin Bridge Farms in Haleiwa on Oahu. Milton Agadir and a partner own that farm. And Milton is now in the process of retiring, and his son, I think his name is Derek, is taking over. He's grows a lot of asparagus for Hawaii. He also grows a lot of potatoes. And Milton, a senior farmer, decided to become a lender to junior farmers. And Julius Ludovico was his first one. He could see Julius's farm from his farm. So he knew who he was, and he really liked the idea of helping a younger farmer get started. And Julius said, the slow money loan, the money was great. I needed that. But the bigger benefit was getting to know Milton and having him as a mentor for his farming. If you want to apply for a slow money loan, go to the Slow Money website, and there is a menu item called Want to Borrow. Or if you just want to get on the newsletter list, there's another one too.
So if you want to initiate the process, slowmoneyhawaii.com, need to borrow.
Two of our slow money loans, Hawaii Co-op was one of our borrowers, and now they are a mature business, and they have been raising a large amount of capital for expansion of their business. And they have done that through a combination of grants and loans and equity. And Slow Money has participated in helping them raise equity. So that's kind of the next level that we're going to with those businesses that are maturing.
Well, thank you so much again for joining us, Mary.
Thank you for having me.
All right.
Yeah, so thanks everyone for coming. I was at one of the previous workshops as well, where we were talking about building out financial plans and what some of the metrics and some of the math equations would need to be in place, in order to apply for a loan, like things like Brandon would typically want to see. So just to introduce myself a little bit in my background. So I'm a financial advisor with Edward Jones, and what I help people with is connecting how their business is doing with their overall personal goals, right? So in the end, what is this business going to do for you? What are your kind of life goals for yourself, your family? And I help people plan and work those things out, and that includes, of course, a lot of investment guidance. So from my early career, I made the first app on the iOS, like Apple App Store, that actually treated anything. So I made a physical therapy app. I started building this while I was in graduate school, and I got asked to be on this Bloomberg show called Techstars. And I was so worried that the faculty of my school was going to see that and then know I was missing all this school. Luckily, they never saw it, so I kind of got away with it. And then after I graduated, I was literally building these apps out of my apartment in the Hilo Lagoon building. So I now live in Kona. But yeah, in 2015, I ended up selling that business to a venture capital firm. And what they were most interested in was the data, where at that time, wearables, health apps were becoming a big market. But nobody really knew how millions of users would interact with such technology. And so the funny part was they weren't really interested in continuing to build the apps. They just wanted the data. And some of that data ended up in the activity framework of the Apple Watch. But after that business was sold, I then opened a number of physical therapy clinics in Kona. And when I first started my business, and I think this is a good idea for any business, if your business is something that you want to maybe one day sell, or you want to be an acquisition target, before you even get started, start reaching out to people that might acquire your business and figure out what they're looking for. So for instance, in my case, there's actually a publicly traded company that acquires physical therapy clinics. So before I started the business, before I had an LLC, anything, I said, what's an acquisition target look like? And they gave me like 7 key metrics. So I go, great, we're going to set up this business from the get-go to be an acquisition target. So one of their metrics was they wanted a certain dollar per square foot figure, right? So when I was opening our first clinic, I said, okay, the office staff is going to work from home. I'm going to pay the clinicians more so they can eat out, because we're not going to have an area for them to eat, right? We're going to have the smallest space possible so that we have the highest dollar per square foot figure possible. And doing that on the front end was really helpful, right? Because I think what most people do is when they're ready to sell a business, they start to try to clean it up and they start to try to make changes. But anyone you sell a business to, they're going to look back, right? They're going to do maybe a 5-year look back, and that might create some trouble. So it's better just on the front end to really think about an exit strategy. It's a weird thing to think about when you're first starting a business, of going, how do I get out of this when you're at day one? But it is something important to think about. And so I ended up selling that business to an individual investor instead of a venture capital firm. And the reason I did that was the venture capital firm wanted me to stay on and basically be a manager and hit certain metrics, and over time they would kind of amortize their payments to me, and I didn't want to do that. So I ended up selling it as an asset sale and going, okay, what's the value of all the equipment here? Let's put a premium on the existing referral sources, the existing kind of infrastructure and payment systems that are set up, and sold it to someone else. And then from there moved on to working for a company called Desktop Metal. And so that's a 3D print company, which they just got acquired for $179 million. But going to the next slide, one of the things we did in our clinic was we made custom 3D printed hand splints. And so we figured out that you can use the Face ID on the iPhone to create 3D scans. And then from there, you can make patient-specific files. So the funny thing was, this little side project ended up being way more valuable than our actual business was. And that's, I think, a good lesson too, of anyone that's starting a business, where your business becomes valuable might be in a different area than you're imagining. And the classic example, right, is YouTube started out as a dating website where people would post videos of who they were and what they were looking for. And then they realized the much bigger opportunity was just make it a website for people to post videos about anything. And so I say that because it's good to be flexible. And actually, so one day I got a call from the CEO of Desktop Metal, and he said, what are you doing with this like 3D printed hand splint thing? It's not really something anyone else is doing. Is this going to be like a separate line of business? And I said, I don't think so, because no one's asking for this. Like, no other clinicians want to learn how to do this. I think we're too far ahead of the market. And everyone always thinks being a pioneer is a great thing. It's often not if there's no one following you and there's no market. And I said, I think it would take me a lot of time and a lot of money to scale this. And they said, well, we have the money and the personnel. So instead of me starting my own business, I solved the problem for them. They didn't have clinical trials, and that would have cost them a lot of money and a lot of time. So instead, I took equity in their business. And so we ended up partnering. And that was a much better idea than going and getting a loan or talking to venture capitalists or anything like that. It made more sense. And now, as I've said, I'm a financial advisor with Edward Jones. I do invest in a lot of health tech businesses. So in the top right, that's myself with the founder of a company called Psionic. And we wanted to make the world's cheapest myoelectric limb. So a limb that would actually work with a neural implant, something that the patient could control by thinking about it. And so initially, we got a lot of traction with industrial clients where Tesla, NASA, they wanted hands because that's the one thing they haven't been able to replace on their assembly line. So we got a lot of traction there, and then we purposely chose to not do that. We said, 4 out of 5 amputees are in third world countries. Even in the US, a myoelectric limb costs $250,000. Most insurances won't pay for that. So we purposely shunned kind of the higher revenue business model and ended up doing a crowdfunding campaign, because we knew what would happen if we went and talked to a bank or a venture capitalist. They'd say, well, why are you looking the other way? Your biggest revenue source is over here. Why are you going that way? Right? The crowdfunding world, smaller loans, a lot of individuals, and people in the crowdfunding world generally look at their investments as kind of a donation to some extent, to where by crowdsourcing, I thought people understood what we were trying to do. They appreciated and valued that. So that ended up being the best source for us to get a loan from. And we did 2 crowdfunding campaigns, and one was just an equity exchange, and the other was more of a loan. But down in the corner here, now I like to 3D print and open source different medical tools for anyone in the world to download and print. So that's an otoscope to look in the ear. And my rule is anything we make, it has to be cheaper than the cheapest available version, and it has to outperform the gold standard or best version before we'll put it online for people to download for free. And then the last picture was just an article and an interview I did with the Washington Post, just talking about some of the open source work I was doing with tourniquets and prosthetic sockets in Ukraine. But a couple questions that I put on the slide, things that I think are important for you all as business owners to ask yourself. One we already talked about there, is your side project or something within your business actually potentially more valuable than your original idea? When it comes to looking at financing, it's good to ask yourself, are you too much of a pioneer? Do you need a long, long runway or not, right? So if you have an idea, like maybe a good example is like a Mamaki tea business, right? Like Mamaki tea is great, it's wonderful, we all probably love it, but the rest of the world, the rest of the US doesn't know anything about it, right? So if you were gonna start some Mamaki business and try to scale it, maybe talking to a venture capitalist would be a better play, because if you went to the bank, they'd say, well, okay, you don't really have a lot of revenue. Yeah, I get that there could be a big market, but you have to have at least 1.25 times the revenue, versus the loan amount you're asking for, right? So if you need a long runway, angel investors, venture capitalists might be a better route, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. And then ask yourself, is your business something that you want to hold forever and pass on to your family? Or is this something that you want to scale and then kind of hand off to someone that maybe is in a better position to scale it further? Do you have other ideas that you want to do? Like with me, whenever I sold a business, I was always like, great, now I can do something else. I had a number of ideas. And then the last question, are you doomed to succeed? Meaning that, is your idea simple and straightforward, and therefore do you need a loan? Like, I had a client that came in the other day, and he was taking a loan. He's got like Squarespace as his card reader, and he goes, yeah, I got this loan, I got this email. I'm like, well, why do you need that loan? It's your business is pretty straightforward, you understand it well, your revenue is predictable. He's like, yeah, I don't know. I just thought I'd get the loan, and that way I'd have more cash. And yeah. Love the sound effects. But yeah, so we're going to be talking about these methods of raising capital. We've already talked a little bit about crowdfunding and formal bank loans. So let's talk about bootstrapping and where that might make sense to fund your own company or not. So if you can use your own resources, right, the big advantage is you keep control to where you're not having to attract partners or give away a portion of your business, right? Give away equity in exchange for capital. But the big con is that your business can grow more slowly that way. And so a good example I see a lot of times in Kona, I myself am a vegan, so anytime there's a new vegan restaurant, I'm like, great, want to go there, right? So a lot of times I walk up, yank on the door, I'm like, oh, it's lunchtime, why are they not here? This seems like a lunch spot. And it's because the person running the restaurant, right, they're using their own resources, and therefore they're still working another job. And then you look at the sign, and it's like, okay, I got to remember they're here like Monday, Friday, and Sunday. Okay, got it. Businesses that have a lot of interest but don't necessarily have the capital to maybe quit their day job, right? That's a good example of someone that could actually probably benefit a lot from some type of lending. Versus like with me, when I started my first clinic, the way I did it, I timed it. I said, okay, in November, I'm going to start my clinic. And that's around the time the resorts get busy in Kona. So I could be on call as a physical therapist, see patients there, right? It cost me nothing to do that. and then I could funnel that money into the brick and mortar business that I was actually building, right? So I had one revenue stream to kind of support building the other. And so I always recommend to everyone, if you are going to bootstrap a business, make sure that you have at least a 6-month emergency fund to cover all your bills. Mortgage, rent, right, car payments, insurance, all of that. Maybe all the way up to 18 months, depending on what your business looks like as far as when you're going to go from pre-revenue to actually receiving revenue. And I always encourage everyone, of course, to look at your minimal viable product. I was talking to someone that started a pool business the other day. So the first thing they went out and did is bought a fleet of trucks and spent a lot of money on a website and shirts and all this. And I was like, why don't you just use your own truck? Why don't you just set up a Facebook page for now for your business? Like, why are you making this expensive, before you have revenue coming in? Just figure out what is the minimal amount of things you need to get going, and then as the revenue comes in, grow. And then with debt financing, with borrowing money from the bank, the big pro is that you don't have to give up ownership or control, right? To where if you take on an angel investor or you take on venture capital money, they're going to want to have, to some extent, a say in how you run your business. And of course, the con is you have to repay that loan. An alternative to this might be just to have a limited partner. So I've had that before with businesses where I had a friend that was in commercial real estate, did really well, kind of needed a place to put his money. And so rather than get a loan, I brought him in as a partner, and then later I bought him out when I felt like he couldn't really continue to serve the business. So he got a nice return, and then I got the control back. And with taking on debt, of course, anytime you talk to a bank, the loan has to generally be for a specific purpose. So you want to have that in mind. You want to have a specific ask, whether it's for equipment, whether it's to expand your business and you need different tools. You always want to have something specific in mind. And these are the various loan types. Term loan at the top. Probably the most familiar thing to compare it to is like a mortgage, where generally you have fixed payments over time with interest attached to that. The next item, lines of credit, where I see this come into play a lot, especially on the Kona side. There are a lot of catering companies that may or may not get a contract with one of the resorts, right? And so their capital needs could radically change, or not, based on a contract. Or I saw this as well with some of our Kona companies that make sauces and salsas, right, where they got into Costco, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, we can't just use a couple Ninja blenders to make our salsa anymore. We need a commercial space and commercial equipment, right? So they didn't really have the revenue to justify a bank loan. So with a bank, right, if you want to borrow $100,000, generally you need to have net operating income of $125,000. That's the rule of thumb. Someone like Brandon can probably find a couple exceptions to the rule on that one. But for a business that's scaling to meet a bigger need, right, they're not necessarily going to have the revenue already to justify the equipment purchases as far as a bank's concerned. And that's where a line of credit comes in. And as Brandon was saying, this is generally a loan that you're going to pay back pretty quickly. And so what I've advised a lot of businesses to do is I say, you can always apply for a line of credit. It doesn't mean you have to tap into it. But that way, that if you do get that contract, if you do scale, you can tap into that line of credit, right then and there.
So on lines of credit, and maybe I should have asked this earlier, so you can apply for a line of credit, let's say $50,000, and you are granted the line of credit, but you don't actually have to use any of it until, or at all.
Yeah. So I once was granted a line of credit, never used it, never paid any fees. There wasn't any kind of initial application process. I think that's going to vary a lot depending on who you talk to.
And then, so then you have it. I got this $50K if I need it. And then if something comes up, you get a bigger contract, you need to scale all of a sudden, then you can draw from it and you only pay interest on what you draw.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so that can be pretty handy because unlike a term loan, right, to where it's pretty elaborate and pretty fixed, this is definitely a lot more flexible. And then, of course, SBA loans, government-backed loans up to 25 years. And generally, the rates are fairly compatible, or competitive and comparable to other types of loans. And there are SBA partners throughout the community. So generally, if you go on the SBA website, they'll tell you which lenders they work with, and that's the easiest way to get that process started. And then equipment loans are usually up to 5 to 7 years. Typically, it has to do with the life of the equipment that's expected, more or less. Microloans are offered through SBA subsidiaries, USDA loans. Anthony can probably tell you a lot more about that. And then the last item, me as a financial advisor, this is actually the only kind of loan type I do, called a margin loan. And so, as an example, I've got a client, he runs a lobbying business in Honolulu. And so, he sometimes is spending quite a bit to take clients out to dinner, host events. So, he might spend a couple $1,000s in a month and then have, a couple million in receivables come in a few months later. So he's got an investment, just a standard brokerage account, worth about $1 million. And so he can borrow up to half of that amount. Of course, it's subject to market fluctuation. So if he borrows $500,000 and the account's worth $1 million, and then the stock market gets hit, and all of a sudden that account's only worth $900,000, he's got to come up with $50,000 quickly because he can't borrow more than 50%. And so why clients like this, it's an on-demand loan. You can turn it on and turn it off, right? And it can be for as long or as short a period as you want. So a lot of people do margin loans for a very short period of time. I had a business that was going to buy a property, and this property was in Palo Alto. And apparently over there, you have to show up with cash. The real estate market is that hot to where you literally need to have cash within that week. So they borrowed against their investments, got the cash, and then once they got the loan, they paid that back and then did their more traditional term loan. So it just was a good stopgap. But it can be an option for anyone that has investment assets.
All right, you ready for a question? Okay, so this one is coming from the Zoom. Tony, this is a great question, and I can already tell you my answer is going to be, because you are a Hawai'i Commercial Kitchens eligible participant, we're going to set up a free financial planning session with you and Brett. So Tony's question is, we make a medicinal salve, and we don't want to get a loan, but we need to find more of the ingredients, and what we have been looking at is purchasing a property to start growing these plants, but it'll take 4 to 6 years for production to scale up and for the plants to become mature. And they're the only ones making the medicinal oils from these plants here in Hawaii. What would you recommend?
Yeah. That might be a good one for an angel investor, someone that has capital that maybe shares your same vision and understands that you don't want to do a loan, or maybe a loan wouldn't be a good fit for you. But I'll give you an example. When I started my app business, that was kind of a new thing. And at the time, because we were the first to make a treatment app, everyone said, you're going to get sued. This is a terrible idea. Like, this is a dumb idea, right? So there was actually an avocado farmer near Ocean View, on the Kona side. She's like, I get what you're trying to do. I think this is great. I think it's going to help people. I want to invest. And so if you find someone that has that kind of passion, an angel investor would probably be a good place to start. With angel investing, there's no minimum or maximum because it's just whatever the person wants to do and how much equity you want to exchange. But I'd say if you're open to exchanging equity, that could be a good one. Yeah, so angel investors, they're not necessarily accredited investors or people that work for an organization. Anyone can essentially be an angel investor. Any one of us today could say, yeah, I'm willing to invest, 15, 20,000 in a business. But you can find them more easily through online sites. So Hawai'i Angels is our local one, to where they're a group of people that have done well in life, and they want to invest in things that they find interesting and kind of suit their preferences. And so they pay a fee, and then Hawai'i Angels has people come in and pitch. And that's how the business owner gets to meet the potential angel investors. And then from there, they work out what they want to do.
So it's like Shark Tank.
Yeah, it's kind of like that.
So are the sharks from Shark Tank, are those considered angel investors?
Most of those deals would be more in line with venture capital deals.
Right.
Yeah, but there are some commonalities. What I would say, as far as what makes sense, as far as when to approach an angel investor, a lot of times you can find someone that's retired that really has ideas and ambition, but they don't really want to kind of jump fully back into the mix of running a business. And so if you can get someone that will not only lend you capital or exchange capital for equity, but also give you really good advice and help make connections, that's even better, right? Because then you've got really smart money in that sense. The value of their involvement is more than just the capital you're getting. But yeah, I'd say check out Hawai'i Angels. And angel investors are perfect for like proof of concept. And that's where, like with the medicinal plants, that's what made me think of that, as that line there, where a bank, right, is not interested in that at all. Venture capital firms are more interested in helping you scale, where once you have a product and you say, okay, I have a product, people love it in my local area, I think people would love this everywhere. That's more when venture capital gets involved. And so as far as approaching a potential investor, these are kind of the 5 steps I'd recommend of, do your research on what questions they're going to ask. Typically, they're going to ask you a lot of questions about what kind of revenue you have so far, what your projected revenue will be in the future, and why you think that is the case. Creating a pitch deck is huge, where when I started my app business and we went from the angel side to the venture capital side, I would just fire off that pitch deck to everybody. I would just look all around the country at different venture capital firms that I thought would be a good fit, and just boom, here's the pitch deck. And if they're interested, they get back to me, and if not, so be it. But I think just like with a bank loan, having a clear ask of saying, here's what these funds are for. And I'd say one of the most common mistakes people make is not asking for enough money, because most people are kind of shy, right, and a little tentative. But you want to ask for more money than you need, right? Because you want to make sure you can get done whatever it is you say you're going to get done, and there might be some hidden costs, right? Or there might be some unexpected costs or some delays. And I think most people in the angel investment world and in the VC world understand that. And being prepared to answer tough questions, just like on Shark Tank, some people come in and they're so in love with their idea that they can't really answer any financial questions about their business, right? Because they just think their idea is so good that it kind of doesn't matter. That never works, when talking to investors. Because they've heard a lot of good ideas, right? So good ideas are a dime a dozen, but having a framework behind that, is pretty rare. And then as far as how much money to raise, I'd say if you're a business where you're trying to take a concept to reality, you want to raise at least 18 months worth of funds, right? So that you can pay your staff if you need to, you can buy the equipment needed, and you can buy yourself a runway. And that's going to change depending on what you're doing, right? Like people in the biotech world would probably say, 60 to 70 months. But if you have a concept that you think you can prove and you don't have that long incubation period, probably more like a year and a half. Yeah, so this is a good flow chart. Most of the time when you're talking to venture capitalists, you're looking at exchanging up to 30% equity. And most venture capitalists will tell you what they want. They'll say, we typically want X amount of equity and we're willing to give X amount of dollars. Typically they already have an idea and they kind of have businesses, in those categories they want to work with. But it's up to you in terms of how much equity you want to give up, There is a strategy to get some of that back where I've seen this quite a bit, so where when VCs come in and let's say they end up owning half of a business and that business does really well, the VCs a lot of times will come up with this idea on their own where they're going to say, look, if the founders don't have more equity, they're going to walk because now they're valuable and they can go work for anybody else. And so a lot of times the VCs will end up working out a deal to give you some equity back. And so that's always a possibility. It's not necessarily equity that's gone forever. Yeah, so venture capitalists, who are they? Well, there's venture capital firms. There's VC firms even here in Hawaii. Sultan Ventures is the one that comes to mind for me on Oahu, but there's a number of them. And typically what they do is they pool money from individual investors, endowment funds, pensions. So that's kind of been a topic lately where you all might have seen the headline where the Trump administration has allowed people within their 401ks to now get involved in venture capital. And most of the reports were reporting this as like an alarming thing, but it's something that pension funds have been doing for a long time. Like the state of Hawaii does that, to where they'll have a very small amount of pension assets in a very high risk, high reward type scenario. And so that's typically where venture capital money will come from. I actually worked with Kaiser Ventures when I had my app business. I had no idea that Kaiser Permanente had a venture capital wing until they reached out. A lot of big businesses do. Like Alphabet, / Google, they have a venture wing. Any Fortune 500 company probably does. But typically, you'll hear terms like a seed round, and then you'll hear like Series A, B and C. Seed rounds are typically from 500 to 5 million, and this is typically like in the food business, I'd say like drink and condiment companies are probably the best fit, right? Something that could really scale, something that has really high margins. Venture capitalists care more about your profit margins than they care about your profit dollars. And so this comes up on Shark Tank when they'll say, okay, you had 2 million in revenue. What were your expenses like? And the person will say, like 1.9 million. Yeah, and the sharks are like, ouch, never mind. Like, I'm not in love with your great idea anymore. Where if someone comes in and they've got maybe 100,000 in revenue, but they have really high margins, that lower revenue business is going to be more attractive because of the margins to a venture capital firm. Because basically their idea is that if you have a wide margin, that's an idea that can probably work in a lot of places, right? If it's more expensive to do business in LA or New York, if you've got a big margin, you can still make that work. And that's the attraction there.
So this is a little bit of a tangent, but I was just talking with a client last week, and they do about 500,000 in revenue, but they're not making any profit. So their plan is to scale up operations. Do you think that's the best move in the moment, or should they try to figure out how to get some profit out of that 500 before they scale up?
Yeah, I think it depends. If there is an economy of scale, to where if scaling takes care of that margin problem, right? To where maybe if they're buying more of something, they get a cheaper price in those scenarios, and yeah, scaling could fix it. Where I would say though, they probably really, really need to look at their operating costs and figure out where the bleed is. I've seen some food businesses, for example, are really great with their margins and their operations on the food service side, but they're really terrible on the HR side, where it's like, okay, that's where the bleed is they're not understanding things like if they use a payroll service, they could get health insurance a lot cheaper for all their employees. And so it's like, okay, you need to clean up more the back of the house. The front of the house looks good. And so sometimes venture capitalists will still get involved in those scenarios because in some VC firms, you have people that have had startups and they have scaled them. So I have seen that where VCs say, okay, I want to come in, I want to be a substantial equity partner, and I'm going to help you clean this up.
Nice.
Yeah, so that can happen. Yeah, but good question. And I think when it comes to approaching a VC firm, there were actually a lot of VC firms that I turned down because with my health tech, app business, I didn't feel like they understood what I was doing. And sometimes I didn't feel like the VC firms had enough business experience of their own to where it's like, okay, this is just money. This isn't expertise. So I'd say that's a consideration of if you go that route, try to look for firms with people that have had similar experiences to what you're trying to do. And then, if we look at this as kind of like steps upwards, if angel investors are the first step, venture capitalists are the second, private equity would be the third. So a good example on the island would be like Nutrex, right? The company that makes bioastin. They went public, right? So they went through that process of getting venture capital funds, proving that this proprietary equipment could produce something that no one else could produce, using that money to get bioastin, in Costco's all across the U.S. And then it's like, okay, let's go public. Let's raise money from basically anybody, right? You can offer shares in the market, people will buy them. But private equity had to get involved to make that happen, right? It's expensive to go public. And in order to do that, right, you might have to feed forward a lot of costs. So private equity is generally when you're looking at like 50 million plus that you need. Kona Brewing would be another good example where they got to the point to where they needed some serious cash to set up the distribution to get their products all over the place. And private equity got involved for the 3D print company I worked for. They actually got involved to merge two companies together. And so when it comes to crowdfunding, crowdfunding can be a good way to raise a small amount of money from a large amount of people. There's lots of crowdfunding websites right now from Start Engine, Kickstarter, Seed Funder, WeFunder. My favorite is actually Start Engine. That one's ran by Kevin O'Leary, actually from Shark Tank. But the reason I like Start Engine is because they have their own market to where if you buy shares of something, you could potentially sell that to someone else. So one of the problems is if you buy something, right, if you crowdfund something and you're an investor, how do you ever get your money back, right? There's very, very limited liquidity. In most cases, either the company goes public and then you can sell your shares after the lockout period of 6 months, or the company doesn't go public and you don't necessarily have any way at all to get your money back. Where Start Engine's trying to change that to where at least you have the chance to where you could sell your shares to someone else, almost like their own stock exchange. So that's why they're my favorite, just because there's potential liquidity. But yeah, the typical crowdfunding statistics are $705 from an average of 347 investors for a total of 244,000. That's the most typical amount raised. And generally these are for businesses that are not going to really fit into anything that we've talked about so far. A lot of times these can be businesses that are for a social benefit, and so that's where like the business that I was an early investor with, Psionic, was a perfect match for crowdfunding because we knew what we wanted to do, and it was more of going, we want to make something happen for the world, and it's not going to be the most profitable business, but we think it's something that needs to be done. So if that's something that you've said yourself, then crowdfunding could be a good source. What I have noticed is initially a lot of these crowdfunding sites looked the same, and over time they've started to differentiate, right? So that there's sort of different sites for different levels of businesses at this point. And you don't always have to give up equity either. You can offer a discount, you can offer some kind of reward, right? Whether it's, like you see it a lot of, if you invest X amount, you'll get a shirt or you'll get some product that they're making, so you can do that as well. Yeah. And so the cons of crowdfunding, a lot of projects don't meet their funding thresholds, right? So the project doesn't get funded. I was a little worried about having to answer to a lot of different people, right? If you don't know what expectations people are going to have, because these aren't professional investors. And so with Psionic, I was worried that hundreds of people were going to be emailing us, periodically, and it was just going to be a time suck. It actually hasn't been, but that's something to be aware of. And we already talked about, limited liquidity. You want to make sure that when you crowdfund, that you get a decent amount of money if you're exchanging equity, because you don't want to set a precedent. So let's say if you're too generous with a crowdfunding round, and then later you look at working with an angel investor or venture capitalist, if you gave away a lot of equity for too little of cash, other people are going to want a good deal like that. So you can kind of back yourself into a corner if you're not careful. So that's where you just have to kind of be confident and really value yourself and your business. And with crowdfunding, the investment cap is either $2,500 or 5% of your net worth, whatever's lower for people that are investing. Because prior to crowdfunding, like when crowdfunding first came out, I was like, is this legal? Because typically to invest in a non-public company, you have to be an accredited investor. You have to have, a net worth, not including your home, of at least $1 million. And basically, that's the Security and Exchange Commission's way of saying, okay, you probably understand what you're getting into. And so when crowdfunding happened, I thought, how are they getting around this? And it's item 6, where the SEC basically said, okay, if we cap this to where people really can't get that badly hurt, knowing that this is a high-risk investment, then that's okay.
So anyone can be a non-accredited investor?
Yeah.
Anyone?
Yeah. Yeah. So, but I guess in theory, right, if your net worth was like $10,000, you could only invest 5% of that, right? And so when you log on to these sites, they'll ask you questions, and of course it's just self-reported. Uh-huh. But you want to put your actual net worth. I've seen people that are like, well, I didn't know why they were asking me that, so I put down like funny numbers. I'm like, no, you want to be honest. Yeah. But then I wanted to talk a little bit about grants. This idea of grants for businesses other than nonprofits is kind of an emerging idea. I don't think it's something that too many of us are experts in yet, because the framework and the rules for this are changing pretty quickly. But some good common examples that have been around for a while are the corporate grants, where big companies, like I listed here, like FedEx, Target, Visa, generally they have some kind of social responsibility initiative to where they want to help small businesses. And why they want to do that, I think the corporate world has kind of noticed that if you fund a nonprofit effort, you fund that, and then when the funds are up, the initiative is sometimes over. Where the corporate world has said, okay, well, if you're funding a business that has a social responsibility but can then be self-sustaining, that's great, right? Then it might not need additional funding. It can stand on its own. And that tends to be where the interest comes from the corporate giants out there. So the typical range on those is between 35 and 50,000. Oh yeah, you've got
No, I was just bringing up the Empower grant. We were just talking with Hawaii Energy about this one. This is a small grant incentive for upgrading your electrical equipment.
even with government grants, you don't necessarily have to be a nonprofit, right? There's all kinds of grants at state and federal levels for businesses that need to survive and are worth doing, right? And some good examples there might be like some of the EV infrastructure, right? Some of those businesses that have set up EV charging ports are for-profit businesses, but they've received grant money. And the typical range on that's going to be between $50,000 and $315,000, unless you're Samsung. And I put down the government gave them $4.6 billion. It was actually like 6.5 in the end. So if you're Samsung, all right, you can get a very large government grant to do business in the U.S. So something that's really new is there's a lot of new legislation about foundations, private foundations actually giving money to for-profit businesses. So these can be to disadvantaged groups in kind of underserved areas, and that's going to be a range of typically $5,000 up to $500,000. And an example that comes to mind with that would be like Magic Johnson, the basketball player. He's got a foundation, and he's used a lot of that money to help small businesses in East LA, right? In places that aren't really going to be targets for loans or venture capital deals. He's used his foundation to help really turn around some areas and give people some opportunities. And down at the bottom, this is definitely something that I get involved with as a financial advisor. What a donor advised fund is, so if it's kind of a trust alternative. So let's say an investor bought Apple stock for $5,000 in the 90s, and maybe today it's worth $1 million. And this investor says, you know what, I don't have any kids, I don't have any beneficiaries, I want to give away this money. What we don't want them to do is we don't want them to sell their shares, pay the taxes, and then donate the money, right? Because they're going to pay capital gains, and whatever tax bracket they're in, they could lose 20% or so. What we'd rather have them do is put it into the donor advised fund, and then all of that money goes to either a charity or a for-profit social enterprise in its entirety, right? And then the donor gets the write-off for the full amount. So if that $5,000 became $1 million, they get a write-off for $1 million, not the $5,000, right? So it helps the donor, and then it helps businesses. And like one way this comes up, so the standard deduction keeps getting raised, right? So now the standard deduction for 2025 for married couples is going to be $30,000. So let's say if you want to give to a for-profit social enterprise $5,000 a year, you're not going to get any tax deduction for that because you're taking the standard deduction. So I tell clients, look, I think you should move 50 over, and we call it stacking. Put it into the donor advised fund, get the write-off for the $50,000, and then you can still peel that off in $5,000 increments. Once the money's in the donor advised fund, it can't come out of it, so they get the tax break in the year that the money went into that, and then they can choose when they want to give the money to either a for-profit business or a nonprofit.
Interesting. A little bit more creative.
Yeah, because I feel like normally when you say grants, most people go, well, I'm not a nonprofit, and that's like as far as the conversation goes, but.
Yeah, no need, not necessarily.
Yeah, so there are definitely other opportunities out there. And then as far as, when you do talk to someone, whether it's an angel investor or a venture capitalist, these are some methods as far as how you can value your business. Because if an investor is going to take a certain amount of equity in exchange for a certain amount of cash, right? If they give you $100,000 and your business is worth $1 million, right? It's like, okay, that would be 10%. So how do you come up with what your business is worth? Usually it's kind of a blend of these three approaches. I'd say for something like a farm, it's typically just, okay, what are the assets worth, right? What is the land plus the equipment worth? plus maybe a little bit of a premium for the fact that someone already set all this up and did all the hard work. So that would be the asset-based method. The market-based method would be comparing your business to another business that was purchased recently. So this method isn't strictly based on fundamentals, right? It's not just strictly based on the revenue you've pulled in. It's like we see this in the tech space where we see businesses that sell for 70 times their annual revenue, right? And it's because that's just a hot space with a lot of interest, right? So it's based on comparable value rather than sort of a real number, if you will. And as far as a market-based valuation for food businesses, most food businesses are valued at 2 to 5 times this term that we have, EBITDA, which basically means 2 to 5 times the money you brought in the door before you subtract any expenses or have any creative math involved. Drink and condiment businesses usually are valued at a much higher multiplier. And it's because these businesses scale a lot easier, right? Where if you're selling drinks and condiments that you can package and send anywhere, the potential to scale that business is probably a lot higher and a lot faster than something like a food truck per se. And then there's the income-based method of estimating value based on likely amounts of future revenue. And so generally this is for businesses that are scaling very quickly, to where if a business is scaling at, let's say, like 50% a year and they've done that for the past 5 years, the income-based method would just project that forward and say, okay, well, we're gonna value your business based on future revenue because no one wants to give away a huge chunk of equity for a small amount of cash if they're scaling quickly, right? And so that income-based method helps to account for that. But yeah, it usually takes a while to figure these things out. So venture capitalists, when you talk to one, generally it takes a couple months to really figure out what's a fair valuation and kind of make everyone happy on both sides. So it's not a quick process. There's not really a lot of just shooting from the hip on that. It just takes time. And then some questions to ask before attracting capital to your business. Just to reiterate, do you want to keep ownership and full control? If the answer is yes, either self-funding, going to friends and family, reward crowdfunding of using crowdfunding but not doing the equity side of that, or grants, right? If you want to keep full ownership and control, then probably angel investors and venture capital are not going to be for you. If you're pre-revenue, so if you haven't brought in any revenue yet, you want to ask yourself, okay, is your idea too expensive to turn into a reality? If so, equity investments, potentially grants, and not loans. So like with me, with the 3D printing, right, the revenue wasn't there to justify a massive loan. So it's either going to be venture capital or partnering with an existing business, and I chose to partner. But yeah, if you're pre-revenue and you have an exciting but expensive idea, that's not going to be a good candidate for a bank loan. And then, do you want an exit strategy or do you want your business to be yours indefinitely? So if you don't mind your business selling, then equity investments, venture capital, angel investors could be for you. So like with my app business, that was more other people's decision to sell that business than it was mine, because I had given up, equity in exchange for cash. So I would have been okay with keeping that business. Everyone else wanted to cash out because the FDA was going to start regulating apps and wearables, and nobody knew what that was going to look like. And so everyone else said, okay, now is the time to get out. So I had to be okay with that. So if you're not okay with that, of someone going, hey, I think this is a good time to sell your business, then venture capital is probably not the best idea. So if you do want to keep control of your business indefinitely, then loans and grants would be a much better way to go. And these are some local resources here to check out as far as funding goes. Each of these kind of do things a little bit differently and work with different types of businesses. So it's good to check on these resources, and I've noticed that sometimes over time, what these local resources do changes. The focus that they have changes a little bit. So I've had people that have said, hey, I've looked at all these things, it wasn't a good fit for me, and then a couple of years later I've gone back and found that it was actually a decent fit for them. And the same thing on the venture capital side. Some of these have said, we only work for businesses in the tourism space, and then they've changed their minds. So, yeah. And then if you have any questions, that's my contact info of my work and then personal info. And then, yeah, happy to help on the business side of things. And then if anyone needs personal investment advice as well with 401ks, IRAs, all that, I'm here for that as well.
And Brett is our official financial planner for the Hawai'i Commercial Kitchens program. So again, if you are registered or eligible, then you can have a financial planning session with Brett, thanks to Hawaii County. Thanks so much for your presentation, Brett.
Oh, thanks. Thank you, guys.
But we will call this the official close of our Hawai'i Commercial Kitchens Capitalization Workshop. Thank you, guys.
Thanks.